Hello. Thank you for joining us again. As always, I have Sara Elizabeth here, who is co-creator of Red Lotus Life. We are so excited to dive deeper into week 2. So last week, we talked about red flags. We talked about embodiment and disassociation embodiment, and also the mind and body connection. This week, we are going to be diving deeper into red flags and what exactly that looks like. I'm really excited to bring this conversation to the table because we're going to also be meshing embodiment with psychology and spirituality. We'll be using terms like soul fractals, just all kinds of things, because all of that is actually part of embodiment. It's just we use language in different ways, but it's all same. And so you're going to get a little piece of us that we have been so excited to actually bring into all of this with this embodiment piece, because let's just admit it, we're in the age of Aquarius, right? And so our language is very expansive. There's a lot of things going on within all of our bodies, the mental, emotional, energetic, physical, and spiritual bodies. And so you're going to hear us talk about a little bit of all of this. We're also going to give examples of subtle and extreme red flags, and also how to implement having this awareness in your life, because we're going to talk about it a little bit, but the definitions that we give and that you can find out there on red flags or embodiment are so general that a lot of times we kind of get lost in the definition and we literally say that doesn't apply to me, or we ask the question, how does that apply to me? So that's what you're going to learn this week in week 2 of the embodiment course. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so good. And I love the fact that we're going to sort of share the experiences of how we can marry the language of spirituality and the language of psychology in order to sort of bring everything full circle. And it's just exciting to me that the two different arenas or fields are starting to actually come together and collaborate. And there's like real research to back these things up. So, a big part of that, and I haven't really shared publicly at all a lot about my personal journey as far as being disassociated and the journey of becoming now embodied. And so a lot of, actually in the last video, Lori had asked me a really specific question about the embodiment process and what really is it? What are we really doing, or where are we going? I'm trying to remember the exact way that she worded it.
Yeah, it was the disassociation, right?
Yeah.
The disassociation question.
Yes. Okay. So someone had asked me specifically the question, so where are you going, or what does that even mean? And so I've been a little bit hesitant to share my personal story of what that looked like, felt like, because my personal experience of it was not felt in the way that we might describe it in terms of psychology. But I really, really love the way that there was an article that I read recently that really perfectly explained my experience and then the marriage of the two experiences. Because yes, we have so much that's happening in the brain, and that's something we're going to share more about in the coming weeks. But there's so much happening in the brain when we are disassociated. But also when we connect it to our spiritual experience and how that looks like in a shamanic sense. So that was my embodied experience, was that it was very shamanic. So the way that I explain it.
Oh, can I interrupt just for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, because honestly, I feel like most people, when they start to go on this healing journey and they start to become associated with their body again, right? They start to come into the body, they start to feel these emotions and all the things. I actually feel like that's probably everybody, because I don't know anybody that would sit there and I haven't read the article yet, In fact, maybe we should even put the article here in the description so other people could read it as well, because I think everyone's going to resonate with this.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anyone sits there and speaks about it like in a psychological way, and how, like, what's happening in the brain and all that. I think it's the way science explains it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if anyone if you asked anybody about their healing journey and how they become embodied again and how they actually strengthen that mind and body connection, I can almost guarantee it's probably the same, right? With this shamanic experience, or how you're using that term.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that completely. And so in that sense, we can explain it, or the way that I like to explain it is a sense of like we have this trauma, experience, and then the soul sort of fractures, right? And so one of the ways that we talk about that is it being a soul fractal. And so when I started this journey, using the tools of the spiral, we were actually able to test in using kinesiology and muscle testing. And I was actually only 30% in my body at that period of time. And I had done quite a bit of work. And so what that looked like was, like we jump out of our body, so to speak, and these fractals are sort of just dispersed, is the way I kind of describe it. And we have to call those pieces back to us. And it's not like we're completely leaving the body, but I kind of visualize it as being sort of like a tether. Because if we actually left the body, we would no longer be alive. So,
true. Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, as my soul is coming back into the body, that journey of descent, I actually experienced it in waves. And at first, it was actually very, very uncomfortable. It was scary. It did not feel safe. My body, being the vessel, did not feel safe. And I don't know, probably so many of you can relate with that experience. And it was something that, in my experience, actually happened fairly quickly. And so then I was able to have that felt experience of it happening fairly quickly. And so now I can now share with others on that same journey that actually we need to do this really, really slow. There needs to be a lot of support because it can be so scary.
It's sort of scary because as soon as you start feeling everything, you're wanting to jump back out, right? It's like, wait a second, this, like, the grief and the fear and just all of those lower vibrational feelings, especially, right? And that's when people are like, okay, this is when I want meds. This is when I want to jump out of the body. This is when I want to completely ignore or be in avoidance, all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even just, being in a state of sort of numbness. So when you're experiencing, or in my personal experience, what my experience was that I felt sort of as a sense that of being as an empath, I could feel everyone else's stuff. But I was so out of my body, so repressed, so numb that I didn't feel hardly any of my own stuff. And that's where, like, words started to be thrown around, like, oh, you're stoic. I think you even probably remember when that was coming up for me.
I do remember that. And I can relate with this because people will often tell me that it's hard. People have known me forever. I mean, I feel like I'm a pretty warm and outgoing person, but you and I have talked about this too. And so I receive, it's hard to get to know you. And I'm always like, what? I'm so transparent. I'm so sure. What do you mean it's hard to get to know me? But that's when I'm in those states, and that's when it's like, I think other people can probably resonate too, because that's when a lot of people will reach for a drink or another type of substance or some other way to numb out the body.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. When we're feeling into those times that we're having the traumatic experiences and we want to disassociate, and then coming back into the body, and beginning to really notice the red flags, right? We're noticing the red flags, we're feeling the red flags, we're feeling the contraction when certain words or emotions come up. And so, yeah, that's kind of a good place, I think, to lead into, the deeper conversation around red flags.
Yeah. I really like how you touched on that embodiment piece again to even speak about the soul fractals, and we dive deeper into what that means in the Red Lotus Life membership, and what that looks like and how to pull it back in and become unified again, right? Because it is a very different experience. And I don't think a lot of people actually do have the words for it, but I do feel as if most people have experienced this at some point in their life. So, I feel like that's when perfect opportunity to talk about the red flags, and we could talk about what they look like and feel like, because like what we shared last week, red flags are very different for every single person. What can be a red flag or an activation or a trigger or anything that will start to put you into a fight, flight, freeze mode can be very different for every single person. So something that might be a red flag for Sara Elizabeth might not be one for me. And then there's huge red flags that are pretty common for everybody, right? So I like that we're diving deeper into this, because I feel like we were talking about this right before we jumped on, how it's not even, yes, we are domestic violence focused here and abuse focused, but it really is just life. Right. And that's why we started with the boundaries workshop prior to this one, and now transitioning into this, because we got so many questions on, well, what is a red flag and how do I see it and how do I know it's coming? So we'll be talking about the subtle ones and then also extreme ones as well. So, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Sara.
Oh, I mean, I just really want again to speak to the fact that there are so many nuances, and yes, to the fact that these things are out there for the world to find, but how do we apply it to us or you? Where does that fit in? How do we identify it within our own intimate and personal relationships? And identify those triggers within our bodies, identify those times when we feel like we're in a state of contraction versus expansion, and just journey with that and continue to reflect and move through it. So one of the things that I wanted to speak on today was the topic of emotional manipulation being a red flag. And so just to give an example of emotional manipulation and what that can look like, it's using, some form of the phrase that I heard many, many times over a particular subject that just kind of came to my memory as an example was, do your friends even know that you don't cook anymore? Or do your friends even know that you don't actually cook a full meal or something like that? Well, the truth of the matter is that story took a really, really long time to get to that place. And just those words alone were meant to evoke a response. There's subtext under there. There is the intent, whether the person is conscious of that being the intention or not. They could be completely unaware, because we are not taught to communicate in so many, and so many times we're not actually taught what emotional manipulation is. But the underlying message there is, you're not good enough. You should feel shame. You should feel guilt. You should feel judged. And also, these people over here are probably talking about you. So that's just like a really good example, I thought.
That is a good example, because that can get in someone's head real quick, right? because there is that undercurrent, there's that tone, right? And then there's that implication that other people are talking badly about you. But you know what? Nobody cares. Nobody cares that you're not. In fact, most people probably aren't cooking. I personally love to cook, so I didn't experience anything like this, but nobody cares. Like, bottom line, nobody cares. So I love that you're even bringing up something like that, because for me, one of the first things that, as you were speaking, that was popping into my head was, is this true? Like,
Right.
is this true? Right. And is this true? Yeah, maybe you don't cook anymore, but that's okay. And also, is this true that other people are talking about you? More than likely not.
No. And also, my real true friends would never judge they're never going to judge that. And so that was sort of the point of like bringing it back to embodiment is, when the nervous system is calm and stable, when the nervous system is regulated, we can, instead of react, and that entire conversation could blow up, turn into a trauma response, turn into dissociation. And, instead, the response now would be something like, gosh, I really think it's funny, like a laugh. I really think it's kind of funny that you would think that there would be an assumption that my friends would judge me. And then it's just diffused, it's over and done with. So that's sort of a way to move through that entire process. And really and truly, it's just getting really, really intimate with language and how to respond versus react, because you can diffuse a situation that can escalate so quickly just with language alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just sitting here going, what would be an extreme version of that I actually did experience? And yeah, there was a time, I don't even know if it really ties in, and maybe you can even tell me if it does. I mean, of course it ties in, but I remember one time I did cook spaghetti, and that spaghetti got thrown up against the wall because that wasn't what was wanted for dinner. And I'm sure a ton of emotional manipulation was involved in that conversation. So that would be an extreme version of that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. Crazy. And now if that were to happen, ooh, no, it actually wouldn't happen, because I'm just not in relationships like that anymore. There's no way that would be happening in my household anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Because I have my own boundaries. I know my worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not even in relationships like that can possibly do that. So that was a good example. It got my mind thinking. Mm-hmm.
I know, right?
Yeah, it did. Because I mean, you and everyone here heard me too, of me going, I didn't really experience that. And I went, yeah, I'm sure most people have actually.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that just recognizing, especially with the work that we're doing, like this conditioning can run so deeply that like we don't realize it until we really start to think about it. And then suddenly you're seeing it all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, totally seeing it. But I love that this also does show the work. Right. This is the work that we do in Red Lotus Life and with the spiral modality, is I don't even recognize who that person was before.
Exactly.
Like the memory is now playing out, and I was going, it feels like a completely different lifetime. So, okay, quick question. That would be an example of soul fractal, right? A soul fractal moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then pulling it back in. So yeah, very interesting. I love it. I love how our conversations go full circle.
Me too. Me too. Let's see. So I think another example of just manipulation, emotional manipulation, red flags and how they can show up. Just a topic of conversation that has come up in the past. Again, like I'm trying to pull from these experiences in order to give a real sense that maybe somebody else can identify with because you've experienced it, but you haven't, maybe like just seeing the definition, you aren't able to recognize it. So for me, the topic of intimacy given my embodiment journey and coming from a place of initially being disassociated due to the fact that I did experience sexual abuse as a child.
Are you speaking physical intimacy right now?
I am speaking just intimacy and also physical intimacy, because I feel like this is something that, especially for those of us who are survivors, who have experienced sexual abuse, and just knowing the depth to which we must go in order to heal from those experiences. So given, use myself as the example again, the fact that I didn't actually start to heal those traumas around the sexual abuse and physical abuse until about, give or take, 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, when we are maybe a little bit longer than 6 years, but when we are on this healing journey and we start to experience, especially when others don't necessarily understand, because for other people who are involved, it can be really, really hard, right? Because they don't actually understand what we're experiencing. They may not have the capacity to be empathetic of the healing experience. And so when we are then suddenly asked the question, if you're not being intimate with me in some way, then you must be, there's automatically this projection, right? Then you must be having intimacy or being intimate with someone else. Mm-hmm. That is, in and of itself, that's emotional manipulation, whether you're aware of it or not. And it's also a projection of your own experience, because maybe that did happen. And maybe that, for the other person, that could be a red flag, right? Oh, if there's no intimacy, then the possibility that is being found somewhere else is very real, because that could have been their experience. But consider that actually this person may just be deep in integration, or this person may be deep in process. This person also may just not want to be intimate, and that's also okay. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts around that?
Mm-hmm. I love this. I want to refer people to our consent and bodily autonomy at this point too, if you want to look deeper into that. We did a whole video on that. I like that you're even speaking to this, because we just interviewed Baka for one of our Lotus Lives, Bikers Against Child Abuse. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the statistics of child sexual abuse. I can believe. Was that the statistics? And it was like 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 boys had experienced that, which, if you do the math on that, that is most people. Okay. Yeah. That is most people. And to be honest with you, with the work that I do, I feel like those stats are even, have shrunk even more.
Yeah. And we don't even know to what extent they're not reported.
Yeah. And I feel like most probably don't report, right? Most probably don't report. So if you do take that consideration, and you do just take a moment and just think, where is somebody else in their journey? What have they experienced in the past? And that projection is very real and very alive. I mean, that was the thing that if there's always that projection of, well, if they're not doing this with me, they're obviously doing it with somebody else. And it starts this story that begins to happen in a domestic violence or a domestic abuse relationship, right? That just, it goes fast too.
0 to 60.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all of a sudden it's like a big thing, and you're having this whole affair, and you've been having it through the whole relationship and all kinds of things. And it's not only one person, but it's several. I mean, it just takes a life of its own. So I love that you're even speaking to this, because what you shared in that consent video that we did was that it's our human right to be able to say yes or no in those situations. And also, there's zero obligation. Just because you're in a relationship with someone does
Right.
not mean that you're obligated to be intimate with them on any level if you don't feel safe. It's also okay to change your mind. That's another thing, right? It's also okay to be like texted or whatever and be like, oh yeah, and flirting and we're going to do this tonight. And yeah, and then all of a sudden, like, you're not in the mood. It's 100% okay. That's a red flag. That, and it's a subtle one, and it's also an extreme one. It can go both ways, just like what we said. Hopefully a subtle example would just be like a comment, or even them getting upset or mad, right? That's a subtle red flag. But then the extreme is what I was speaking about with the whole, and you too, 0 to 60. And now it's a whole story of its own. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I think it's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And because, not only do you have the projections that actually have nothing to do with you, it's completely and totally the perception of the other. But then all of the accusations, the assumptions, and everything there's based really in zero reality whatsoever. So, I mean, it just grows and grows and grows and grows. And, at that point, it's just like, okay, like, let's take a step back, and can we actually have a conversation? Can you actually have empathy for where this person, for where they're coming from, where they are on their journey? Are you even available to receive that there's a journey, that there is a process? There's a lot of different ways you can look at it.
Yeah, I like that you even brought this up also, because there's this other aspect of, I think most people probably don't share that they've experienced any kind of sexual or physical abuse as a child. And I also don't think that many people even have connected any kind of intimacy issues as an adult with the things that may have happened. I mean, they do to some extent, but not, we just had a call the other day with one of my clients, where we were really diving deep and going into connecting even the anatomy of the body, and how even the anatomy of the body is associated to specific emotions. And just so the audience, knows this part. So Sara Elizabeth is a womb spiral practitioner. I'm an advanced spiral practitioner, but I don't really know anything about the womb gates and the emotions and things that are associated there. So that is a completely different, like, we go deep when we're talking embodiment. We go deep into
literally
what
into the
it's
body.
really. Yeah, exactly. I like what we're talking about is so surface. It's hard for me not to go deep.
Right. We're going into the DNA and all of the places.
Yeah. So, it really does bring up a lot there. So we had, the subtle flags are if somebody is upset because you're not intimate or don't want to be, or you've changed your mind. And then something extreme is, what's common for everybody, right?
Right. And also, like, you have a right, any person has a right to be upset. But again, it goes back to communication. You have a right to be upset. We have a right to be upset. It's just, can we find a way to have a conversation where everyone's needs get met?
Yeah, love that. Well, did you have any more that you wanted to touch on?
I don't really think so right now. We could go down this rabbit hole for days and days and days.
I know, like, I'm already thinking about all the things, right?
And I'd like to share that I do feel I don't know, I feel a little bit nervous because it's the first time that I have shared some, like, to this extent, in a very public way. So I am feeling a little bit of like the nervousness and that embodied sensation of did it.
Yeah, you did do it. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you right now. But yeah, even that you're even sharing like how you're feeling with that embodiment, right?
Mhm.
How, like, what is happening in the body? Well, you're feeling nervousness, or you feel. I really like. Do you care if I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Okay. I'm curious as to, because I always like to ask, what is the underlying? Like, this is part of embodiment, and this is part of the mind, body, soul connection that we talk about so much here. So, what's under the nervousness?
Usually, for me specifically, it's usually fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would be, do you care, like, what would be the fear in this situation?
Hot seat.
I know. You
I
can
love
totally
it.
do this to me.
Oh, no. It's okay. I love it, especially given we were already talking about hot seats earlier in our meeting. The fear is, just that, like, I have a desire to keep anonymity, and I have a desire to, keep certain things and people safe. And when you speak on topics such as sexual abuse publicly, I think that always comes with a certain amount of fear.
I think so too. But I think you're amazing, and I think you're beautiful and brave. And for me, one of the most healing aspects of my journey is when I do publicly share my experience, because what I've found is that everyone else has had some kind of something as well. So it's actually inspiring and empowering once this part moves through.
Right.
Yeah. So I always encourage everyone to share. So even anyone who's watching, I mean, just know that this is, again, we're always doing the work. That's what we talk about here, is that we're always doing the work. It doesn't matter how much work we've done, we're always doing the work. And I encourage people to really, when you can face these fears, that's when a lot of times you realize, oh, it's really not that bad. It's really not as scary as I thought. And that you really are brave and you really are courageous. And usually I also, both of us believe in divine timing and alignment. So there's definitely a message. If Sara Elizabeth was called to share that, there's definitely a message here. And I'm sure that it's touched someone who needed to hear that message. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful note to end on.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd like to first say thank you so much gratitude for joining us. We know that your time and your energy is very precious to you. So thank you for sharing that with us. Also, if you've enjoyed this, if you think there is somebody out there that could also use this information and this knowledge, because a lot of times we don't realize when we're in it, and I was one of these people, when we're in it, we don't even realize we're in it. It takes someone external to come and say, hey, look at this. And maybe this is something that you would resonate with. But please subscribe, like, and share. If you're interested in diving deeper, we invite you to join us in the Red Lotus Life membership. This is where we totally dive deep into all the things. We do emotional clearing, all kinds of things, so that you can create a life that you love after abuse. So the link is below if you're interested in that. And thank you for joining us for week 2. We'll see you next week for week 3. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
And live your life to